I'm the archivist. I teach history at Alabama State University, and my colleagues here are Ms. Cassandra Cavness, she's the digital archivist, and Ms. Jina DuVernay, she's the special collections librarian. And we're going to talk today about Black History Month revitalized at HBCU, in this case, Alabama State University. So the question, how is ASU celebrating Black History Month? And so that is the premise of today's conversation. And we looked at this presentation is broken up into 4 parts: the history of Black History Month at Alabama State University, the Black History Month celebration, and how that played out, and then of course the outcome. We took to make an assessment of the way Black History Month, or our attempts to revitalize it, actually played out. At Alabama State, we divided the celebration of Black History Month into 3 epics and 3 individuals who grabbed the celebration and sort of fashioned it for their era. Between 1925 and 1952, then President Harper County Trinum really was a contemporary of Carter G. Woodson, and was in collaboration with Carter G. Woodson. He worked closely with the Association for the Study of Afro-American Life and History, African-American Life and History, or initially Negro Life and History. And so he was really critical during the years of his administration. Alabama State was a teacher's college. He set up tools at the institution to provide teachers not only in Montgomery, Alabama, where Alabama State is located, but throughout the state. He provided tools to allow those teachers to have the resources necessary to disseminate information about the contributions and activities of African Americans in not only United States history, but world history. The next epic is under Norman Walton. Dr. Walton was a professor between 1949 and 1984. He really took on the reins of Black History Month during that period. Norman Walton started to organize trips to West Africa. He brought in a number of noted scholars. There were a number of publications on campus. So he really spearheaded Black History Month in those intervening decades. And then lastly is Dr. Dorothy Autry. Dr. Autry really created, she chaired the Black History Month committee on campus, and it really acted as an umbrella organization where Black History Month activities from different divisions on campus would be funneled through her office, and then they would create a master calendar and sort of act as a conduit to promote activities relative to Black History Month, not only on campus, but throughout the community. Okay. And so there was an administration that that took over the institution, or a new president that took over the institution, and they had a different feeling, not only about Black History Month, but about the number of programs on campus generally. And so this new administration really cut down the number of programs that were celebrated during Black History Month, and really created difficulties for Dr. Autry and her committee to execute a vibrant and thriving Black History program. I would say that during the course of Black History Month, there were about 30 to 35 Black History Month related activities: theater, the arts, history, all the various entities on campus coming together in various ways to celebrate Black History Month. And in the aftermath of the new president, there were about 2 or 3 Black History Month programs. And it really became poignant when I remember having a student come to me and complain, several students, that Alabama State did not take seriously Black History Month and did not have the types of programs that they thought would be expected at a historically Black college. And I felt sort of devastated because I knew how cutting edge and how aggressive Black History Month had been at Alabama State. And so I chair a committee, the Cultural Heritage Committee in the library, and I had these 2 ladies approach me about revitalizing Black History Month, and they'll take the story from here.
Okay, so we have, I'm part of, as a new librarian, in May I will have been a librarian at Alabama State for 2 years. As a new librarian, your first year, you know, you just try to get in there and see what's what. By second year, I'm like, I'm at an HBCU and I'm not privy to anything going on for Black History Month. So I spoke with my colleague, Cassandra, Cavness, and I asked her, do you know of anything going on for Black History Month? This might have been in September. This past September, she said no, and we looked at each other like this. So I went to the chair of the Cultural Heritage Committee that we all three are on that has been non-active, right? And proposed to Dr. Robinson, hey, if not us, then who? Let's do something. We have no money. It's September, but let's do something. And he said, okay, that didn't take too much convincing. So I thought that was a win. So I said, in addition to revitalizing the Cultural Heritage Committee, we would start doing something for Black History Month. We decided to meet on a weekly basis, and we decided that given, you know, the short month, we'll divide up the 4 weeks into 4 different themes, being Art Week, Food Week, Music Week, and Theater Week. So in addition to that, you know, Valentine's Day falls in February, so we decided we could be a little corny and do something for Valentine's Day as well. So what worked out of the whole month was our Art Week, our Valentine's Day little celebration, our Food Week, and of course the collaboration that we took part in. What didn't work was our Movie Week, our Theater Week. Well, we didn't have a movie week. We showed 1 movie each week, our Theater Week and Music Week. And Cassandra will talk about our Art Week.
So the theme for this year's Black History Month was African Americans in Times of War. So I wanted to do an art exhibition, student-driven art exhibition. And so I came up with the title, Why We Fight African Americans at War. It did work. We did have the exhibition. However, we only ended up getting 2 submissions from students. So not as great as we wanted, not as great as much participation as we wanted, but we still wanted to highlight them. We did send out art calls. We did pop into their classrooms and encourage them. We worked with the art professors. They gave extra credit if they submitted work. However, still only 2 exhibition pieces. So you'll see here, there's one on this side and one on that side. Those are the 2 pieces we got. Very different, but you know, so we had this up for an entire week.
Okay, I'm up again. So for Valentine's Day date, this was really fun. This wasn't a part of our initial plan, so we didn't want to put too much into it. We wanted to make it relatively easy on ourselves. We came up with a pretty little flyer. We coordinated with the cafe that's located in the library, and they offered a free little drink. We put some candy up, some balloons, and we interviewed 2 couples, an older couple who met at ASU, and we talked about a younger couple who met at ASU, and we talked about the difference in dating then and now. Our Art Week was Mrs. Gilmore, a woman who put her foot in it for, or Food Week, put her foot in it for freedom. This was a success. We just identified a local woman named Mrs. Georgia Gilmore who she cooked for the foot soldiers, the civil rights foot soldiers in Montgomery, Alabama, and generated funds for the Montgomery bus boycott. We had local speakers come. They brought different photographs of Georgia Gilmore. We found 2 recipes. We chose to do the least economical recipe, which was her pound cake, and they all left with a recipe card with her pound cake recipe on it, so they also could go home and cook the pound cake that Dr. King ate.
So just real quick, because I know we got to wrap up here, but so we had movies each week, like we said. We made signs that stood in the lobby so people would know what we were showing every week. We collaborated with professors. They would give a pre-talk before each movie to kind of set some context for the movie. Now, we did have classes come, but they would leave right as soon as the movies were, their class time was over. So that didn't really work out well audience-wise for us. So looking forward, we're going to start planning pretty much as soon as we get back. We're going to start advertising and promoting, in October. We're going to have more programs with a learning center focus. We had some that were just kind of fun to do this year because we were just late in the game. And work with more collaboration with our faculty across campus, not just specific targeted departments.
Thank you.
There you go.
Oh, great.
It's at the tab.
It's
at the top.
Oh, right here.
No, right.
Oh, I brought a Mac, folks, so I'm in a foreign lane with these PCs.
There you go.
Oh, excellent. I'll try to read, I promise around maybe 3 minutes, I'll actually show some stuff. But in the interest of the 10 minutes I've been afforded, I want to at least say that my name is Kermit Bailey. I'm an associate professor of graphic design at NC State University. The work that you're about to see, I was privileged to get access through a community-based project, and the analysis I'm trying to infer on it is part of some doctoral work also at NC State University in communication and rhetoric. So anyway, let's sort of, without further ado, so move along. As a specific frame for rhetorical analysis, I consider 6 archival photographs taken in CHAVIS Park by 2 photographers. 2 images circa 1939 and 1950 are produced by Lemuel Delaney. 4 images circa 1958 are produced by James Autry. Both are African-American citizens in Raleigh during the era. These private citizen photographs are now collectively part of the South Park Community Archives initiatives. The images presented are not technically perfect. However, we can infer both photographer and both the photographers had reasonable technological means for the era. As an overarching cohesion, the 6 photographs analyzed symbolize 2 distinct but connected themes as narratives: progress and mobility, people, places, and artifacts. Photographically captured is a sense of hope for separate but equal recreational amenities amidst the burgeoning but still nascent Raleigh landscape. Making the case for rhetorical analysis, the part of the larger project, which I don't have time to get into today, basically sort of steps back and tries to look at the production techniques of the era, and so the social context which culturally situates the 6 photographs. The reproduction, separating out as an interrogation of the image, and an accident of what the visual story includes as well as excludes, and the rhetorical circulation. And so I'm looking at, just in the larger project, the audience reception over time, and how 30, 40, 50 years later, that's sort of recirculated into the public discourse. So a little bit about Dr. Lemuel Delaney. Dr. Delaney's contribution to the South Park East Raleigh Historical Archives was given to me, or given to Spurner, I should say, by his granddaughter. Of about 4 photographs total are part of the legacy artifacts of a prominent Raleigh family. 2 of the 4 are featured in this presentation for rhetorical analysis. When juxtaposed side by side, they provide a window into Delaney's ideological position as well as his camera's position. We know from archival records and interviews that Delaney's social standing in the community was of such a nature that he hosted at his home dignitaries of the day, such as W. Du Bois. As told by his sisters in their book, Having Our Say, Dr. Du Bois always stayed with my brother, Lemuel, speaking of the photographer, and his wife when he visited Raleigh. In some contrast, she goes on to state, these are the sisters, state in their book, that Du Bois felt that their father, Henry, Papa was not aggressive enough by Dr. Du Bois standards. And in fact, Dr. Du Bois considered that he thought my father was a handkerchief head kind of Negro, the bowing and stooping kind. And so therefore he chose to live with her, or stay with her brother, And so we can infer from that, sort of choosing to stay with the brother, that Dr. Du Bois felt that the younger Delany had a dignified social position. So, in the first photograph, basically we see the original entryway to Chavis Park. For those who are local, obviously, you know about Chavis Park here in Raleigh. The outside of the city would eventually become the inside of the city. So back in the day, in 1939, nobody wanted to live in this area. It was the outposts. And now, essentially what we see through gentrification is folks want to get back downtown. So a little bit about the actual photograph itself. Use of a wide-angle lens. The photographer is motivated to capture context and social vibrancy of the park. Sepia quality lends a sense of nostalgia, and less than perfect production framing, a sense of authenticity. Subjects appear unaware of the camera, the photographer. The carousel is unenclosed, only protected by a canvas tent, and appears to be the park's main attraction. The facility to the left likely includes a restroom. It appears to be a sunny day, possibly sunny, as Sunday attire is being worn. Cars of a good variety, possibly indicating the commingling of various socio-economic classes. Dirt roads, pedestrian cars likely share some infrastructure with sidewalk only at the building types. An interiority or inside quality of the park is shown. What the story excludes functions and interpretive lands. There is no city skyscrapers at this time, the backdrop to the park as has emerged today. Delany probably could not have imagined outside of the city would in effect become the inside. So on to the next one. So I spoke earlier about Dr. Delany having a dignified photographic eye. So the subjects, all male in this instance, are intimately constructed when compared to figure 1 or the images I just shown. We can possibly discern individual identities. Subjects appear to be part of a swim team as similarly adorned. Each of the camera, subjects are in effect on stage via the diving board, aware that they are being watched. They are statuesque or regal in posture. The photo is of good technical quality, sepia quality lending a sense of nostalgia, and less than perfect production framing a sense of authenticity as well. And so what the story excludes, within the shadow of local history and places as generalized, there are identities and circumstances which still merit greater attention. The subjects are unnamed or unknown in terms of the demarcation of the photograph itself, but often because of the loss of these archives, we don't know the individuals. We happen to know many of them, however, in this case. Also, just kind of elephant in the room, you can see back, even as far back then, there's a vibrant social swimming community amongst African Americans. As part of James Archery's collection given to Sperner for use, as part of that, the 4 images featured have been more formally named the James Archery Chavis Park Historical Photo Collection, memorializing his contribution. Archer granted exclusive permission of use to Sperner with some mistrust of their commodification. And so I am inferring that he's given to this community organization with the idea or the awareness that they will be commodified by others, but he's probably not anticipating that through digital circulation that it will be sort of like unleashing Pandora's box, that once out in this sort of digital milieu, that he would not be able to control it, nor would they, as it turns out. But in any event, we are aware that through Archer's work that he's very aware that he's telling a story. And so it's very interesting, the war theme that came up in the presentation just before me. Chavis Park has a kind of residual wartime aesthetic. And so you can sort of see these. This is an airplane slide. It's not a real airplane at all, but the kind of urban mythology around this image and the idea of the wartime. So in this context, it is well known that Chavis Park and the surrounding areas served as a World War II military barracks of the time. And so children appear to be in fall or winter attire. signaling the park's expansive use from mostly a summertime activity. The trees have no leaves to indicate that. Gender appears about equal but notably split, meeting in the middle. I thought I heard a click. It's my time up, but ages of children appear to be about 8 to 12 years old. The photo is of good technical quality. The photos have a good tonal range. The story excludes, there's a strong military residual aesthetic in the park, Negro troops being barracked near the park just before World War II. The airplane slide itself was installed after the Korean War, so 1950, not World War II. It's mere existence of some debate with city officials prior to the emergence of these photos in 2008. So everybody who was around then, they know that this was there, but 40, 50 years later, the city said, nope, we never had one, so on and so forth. And so someone emerges, his daughter, and says, yes, we did. So that's kind of the backdrop on that particular image. This one is the, let's see, lost my place a little bit here. This is the kiddie train. And so what the story includes is there are mostly male children riders with one girl and maybe a mother visible at row 6 from the left. The train adult conductor creates a strong directional vector leading to 2 older kids approaching the train from the right. Their friend right side appears to be engaging the camera, aware of the photographer's presence. The photo is of good technical quality with production framing. It's suggestive of some expertise. The photos have good tonal range, et cetera, et cetera. So his real profession, how he made a living, was with the Postal Service, not as a professional photographer. So you have to consider in the time that that ability to construct a photo and the technical capacity was kind of unusual for photography in the era. My final image, I entitled, the title I gave it years later, is Boy on the Move. What the story includes, the photo is less technically perfect. It's a little blurry, but we can see the infamous Carousel House has now been enclosed. And so you see that sort of transition or kind of movement from that original 1939 image I shared with you. While the photograph is less technically perfect, it has a lyrical and poetic dimension. The photo requires more of the viewer, but it's an open text as a result, allowing us to read into it. And so my Boy on the Move, naming it, and what you might be thinking of it now is what I'm calling that open text that allows us to infer into it in an interesting way. So moving along, why are these things important now? I'm basically saying as the progress in social mobility and narrative continues to unfold at CHAVIS Park today, and around a rhetorical understanding of these photographs is useful, and I would argue lend even more authority to their potential relevancy as historical record made contemporarily relevant. There is a critical need for context and understanding in urban redevelopment interests. And part of my personal research investigation was to sort of reclaim some of this photograph, to put it back into circulation. So we're essentially going from a private collection, like they didn't even think it existed, and I created a project to kind of map out these and created a mapping series to document that particular activity at CHAVIS Park and the surrounding areas. And so I want to thank the South Park East Raleigh Neighborhood Association for their contribution and my allowing me to work with them and have access to them. And so you can see yet again how that one image from 1950 is now circulated back into contemporary paraphernalia, et cetera, et cetera.
for Jina Cumberbatch. I serve as the director of the Community Engagement Center and Social Justice Institute at the University of Texas at Austin. And my role is sort of twofold. One, within the division, our job is to recalibrate how we discuss inclusion and diversity at a student level and a faculty level. But the work that I do is really around making us less of an ivory tower and more of a community anchor. And what does it mean to truly be engaged in our community? And part of the work that I'm privileged to do is to take part in reshaping how we value inclusiveness and equity. And as more than a check mark, but a fundamental value shift. Historically, our institution and our institutional infrastructures have worked to silo particular experiences, voices, and identities, failing to truly integrate and intersect the values of all. And so the As We Saw It project is something that I started off when I was in grad school at the LBJ School of Public Policy. And we could really argue in the making project, but something that really started about 4 years ago when we realized that these stories were literally dying off. And if we weren't going to capture it now, we would lose sight of the contributions that these, what we call precursors, which are Black alumni that were a part of the university anywhere between 1950, the beginning of integration, to 1975, which is where we kind of argue is the integration period. If we hadn't started to document those stories, what would we be able to do in terms of moving the conversation forward? And so as a country, I think as we engage in these really important conversations around justice, civil liberties, and human rights, these are new, but not new, but very critical conversations about how we mandate attention, empathy, and learning, and understanding about what it means to be truly inclusive and what does equitable opportunity on a college campus actually look like. And so one of the most powerful drivers of how race is described, citizenship is defined, and politics of access are determined is quite simple. It's the words we use, the stories we choose to tell, and the methodology we use to document such narratives. As America and the world engage in ongoing conversations on civil rights and renegotiate institutional and political practices of equality and access, how we frame experiences and elevate historically marginalized communities is important. And so we argue within this book and within the larger project, which started off as a website, is that in the context of these ongoing conversations, when we're talking about Black Lives Matter, we're talking about Islamophobia, or the deportation of millions of people in terms of the conversation of the Dreamers in DACA, how we understand the historical context of diversity, the historical context of integration is ever important. And particularly when these are the type of stories that our students of color are confronted with every day, right? The school to prison pipeline, the suspension rates and disciplinary conversations that we see happening K through 12. And some of you guys might be familiar, in the midst of the Texas versus Fisher University lawsuit, what Judge Scalia said about students of color at predominantly white institutions, right? And this was a really rather lovely remark that was tweeted back in conversation. And so we believed that this book was ever important, particularly now in this context, right? As a way, as a tool to sort of rebut some of these things that we're talking about when it comes to students of color, and particularly at predominantly white institutions. So I'm gonna walk you through a little bit about how this book and this project came about, sort of the motivations. When we were just starting the research project, we realized that these stories were nowhere to be found. University of Texas considers itself a research space, right? What our motto is, what starts here changes the world. And so we were arguing, well, if we don't actually have these stories documented, then we're totally siloing a huge contribution to the larger cultural and social landscape of this university and the city. So it actually started off as a website project where during my graduate studies, I was interviewing as many precursors as possible. So again, this was anyone who began the integration period, which was at the graduate school level in 1950, or all the way to when undergraduates were admitted in 1956. And so to give you just a little bit of context about this research process, when I went to the Briscoe, which is the American History Archive and Museum that's located on the University of Texas campus, I was handed sort of 2 vanilla folders about this thick. And this is after giving them about 40 names, dates, certain events that I thought would be surely documented in newspaper clippings. And I was handed these 2 vanilla folders, and the label on the folder was simply Negroes at UT. Someone had done an incredible job of contextualizing, nearly 60 years of history in simply those 3 words. No dates, no names addressed to sort of these loose leaf papers and photos, right? And so for us, that was just further confirmation or affirmation about the importance of this work. And just a little bit more insight, we were trying to organize an event to celebrate or recognize the 60th anniversary of the first class of undergraduate Black students, which happened in 1956. So as you can imagine, 50 to 1956 was merely a conversation at the administration level about, all right, surely we'll invite people who are looking for graduate studies. They're probably married, have children, they're not gonna live on campus. It's a whole other ballgame if we invite them to be in our classrooms at that age of 18 to 22. But when I went to the registrar office, I was like, can you just give me a list of all the 1956 Black students? They're like, we don't have that list. We're like, okay, well, 100 years of keeping us out, you think you literally have a black list of some sort. And I was told that the only way to get that was to look through 200 pieces of microfilm that somehow were not organized by year, but alphabetical between 1929 and 1959. So again, rather than being enraged, we're like, this is just further affirmation that if no one else had done it, we were gonna have to do it. So we had to look roll by roll, and because race was not noted on transcripts, the only way we could think to get that information was comparing it to a list of historically Black colleges, segregated high schools. And if they were on that list, then they must be African American. So a little bit around how we organize the book. Again, within the context of that, this is going to be a tool used to reconcile some of the institutional policies and practices currently being administered at UT, so that students of color who were sort of experiencing these microaggressions had an understanding of what came before them. And so the first chapter, we started with Heman Sweat, who was the first African American to enter in 1950. He entered through the law school. That was the Sweat v. Painter, which, to give you some context, predated Brown versus Board, right? So this isn't just about UT history, this isn't just about Texas history, this is about national history. And then we sort of moved into the context of sort of the policy that was happening at the very beginning of this conversation. So this is a picture of Astor Kirk, who was one of the first graduate students, and I'm sure you guys recognize the guy in the middle, then President Lyndon B. Johnson. And these are just some incredible photos that are throughout the book that we, again, contextualize it within sort of the conversation of having, you see some of these signs saying assembling at UT is a lie. And one of the conversations, this liberal bastion, and people say the blue is disgusting, but it's also probably right on par, which is we vote liberally, we vote democratic, we vote the blue part of the state, yet that's not necessarily making a trickle-down effect in terms of how the context of Austin in terms of equality and equity. One of our other chapters is on sort of the intersection between athletics and activism. This is just sort of helping to realize that, yes, we integrated in 1956, but the students weren't able to participate in social activities such as athletics until 1965, when we had the first Black student to become a part of the track and field team. This is a picture of the first class that integrated a Black student on the football field. Again, if you think about the context, integrating in 56, we don't get our first African-American football player until 1971. You kind of see them, he's a little throw in the larger context. So what does that say in terms of slow progress, in terms of sort of the social politics at play, which is you can come get an education, right, but that's all we're affording you, right? You don't get to take part in the larger social context of what it means to be a collegiate student. And arguably, is that still happening with some students of colors in institutions like this? This is Retha Swindell, which was the first Black woman to be on the basketball team. And then chapter 5 is about the social politics of between gender and race, which we felt was really important to highlight. This is one of the first Black dorms, which wasn't on campus because we didn't integrate dorms until 1965. you get a sense of that. And then lastly, we talk about sort of the context outside of UT, right? So as we're going through all of this policy change, the power of UT as a microcosm, right? Because what's happening on this campus is largely what's happening in Austin and around the state. And so we really see this book, this tool, in terms of narration and in terms of documentation, as a way to shift history and context and create agency for students and for community members. I'm gonna skip along a little bit. And so how we do that, we think of that in terms of creating opportunity for there to be interaction between current students and what we call the precursors. And it's been such a healing and sort of reconciling process for our precursors. We hosted an event in 2016 before the book was published just last week. And some of those precursors who had graduated in 1959, 1960 hadn't been back on campus since then, because it was such a traumatic experience. And so what is the power in making sure these stories are told? And again, a mechanism for transforming institutional policy, right? How does our division take these stories and generate it in a way that helps us confront some of the systemic things that were still taking place at UT? And so this book is meant to provide insight into a generally undocumented part of UT's historical lexicon and honor the contributions of Black students to the cultural, social, and political landscape of the 40 acres. These are the precursors at the 60th anniversary. And then these are some of the women. We've done 4 different panel events that have been really well attended by students and community members and Texas legislators. And this one was about gender. And again, connecting this to the current context. This just happened last year, the removal of the Jefferson Davis statue. All these things taking place, but again, connected to this historical legacy that has been woefully undertold. And again, the continued conversations of students about the need for diversity and inclusion on campus and the policy outputs that can come from this if we continue to nurture this part. And so lastly, I am going to skip ahead. Minutes goes really quickly, guys. So this is where you can find the book. It just came out last Tuesday, so I only have 2 copies with me. But it's on Amazon.com. You can get it at UT Press and then local bookstores. But thank you guys so much.
So I'm going to greet you all as a native Texan and say, hey y'all, how are you? Okay, so I am honored to be here to share my journey to and through Seen and Unseen, a Sunday afternoon in Clarksville. So as a 5th generation Austin, Texas native, program administrator for the John L. Warfield Center for African and African American Studies, which is part of Black Studies at the University of Texas at Austin, and a writer whose work and research centers around the ways in which activism plays a role in the lives of Black women in the American South. This project was a natural extension of my work and passion in a way that compelled me to explore the historic community through a creative and hopefully thought-provoking lens. Seen and Unseen is a reckoning. It's a love letter, a prayer, an offering from and for Clarksville. Clarksville, a freedom community founded in 1871 in West Austin that, like so many others, was severely impacted by displacement and dispossession. These images speak to the attempted erasure of this small, close-knit community, as well as its beauty and resilience. And I should also mention that there's 2 different galleries that are part of the John L. Warfield Center, and this is the Idea Lab, and it's really constructed to be this intimate space for students to come in and for people to really interact with the work. And I purposely, you'll see there's different color walls kind of based on what the art is. Working with photographers, Hakeem Adewumi and Celeste Henry, who understood early on the scope and breadth of the project, and graciously allowed me to guide what they captured, to stand with me as both documentarian and witness to the geographical memory reflected through images of former residents and their families, historic buildings, architectural remains, found tools, toys, and household items. So as well included in this is a display of written and photographic evidence showcasing the tireless organizing and activism waged by the community. There's also a documentary that was made in 1970 in which residents of Clarksville basically expressed their frustration, their angst, their anger, and fear around various impending threats, most specifically the construction of Mopac Expressway that was built and ended up displacing over 71 families. So now I'm just going to talk specifically to a few images that really aided me in my journey and inspired me to create the exhibition the way I did. So this photograph is of Pastor Steve Manning outside of Sweet Home Missionary Baptist Church, also known as the heart and soul of Clarksville. And also, so the second part of the exhibition, A Sunday Afternoon in Clarksville, is a tribute to the important role that this church played in keeping the community together, focused, and vigilant. The church is still active, and these days, Sundays is the only time those who grew up in Clarksville read the Black folks that have been displaced from Clarksville. This is when they come back, which is part of why this exhibit was named after that. The congregation has been so welcoming, supportive, and encouraging of my presence there and this project. They have given me their trust, which continues to motivate and inspire me daily. This piece by Hakeem Adewumi is Mended Fence at Clarksville. I noticed one day this part of the fence that surrounds Sweet Home. And after further investigation, I realized what this is. Can you all tell what this is? Right. So they used bed springs to mend the fence. And originally this fence was made out of barbed wire. It's since been changed, but they left this in. This is a very historical piece, something very easily missed, walked past daily. It speaks to the strong sense of community, ingenuity, and simply making a way out of no way. This image alone was what sparked my approach to this exhibition. I discovered that instead of speaking for the people of Clarksville, which is what I was trying to do at first, like I'm gonna, have this kind of photographical display of gentrification and show pictures of homes now versus the homes before, which I think has its place, but it did not give voice to the folks that were there and fight to still be there. So instead of speaking for them, I let them speak for themselves and let them speak through the images. This is where the title Seen and Unseen came from. The next one, Found Bottles on a Cistern. So I learned of the cistern, or well, on the now land of a current white resident who moved to Clarksville in the 1970s. The colored bottles found on the land triggered a sense of loss for me immediately, seeing them. Loss of family, of friends, of those who once called the land home, as a hurried and forced departure, or maybe even intentional action by leaving items in an attempt to be remembered or a sign of protest. The cistern also spoke to me. It spoke directly to the 1928 master plan that destroyed several freedom communities, including Clarksville, in and around the city, by systematically denying services such as running water, flood control measures, street lights, and paved roads, in some cases up until 1978. Schools were closed and relocated across town, forcing students to travel through unsafe, hostile, segregated areas of Austin to get to and from school. Trash and sewage from surrounding white neighborhoods were dumped into these communities, and other heinous tactics were employed, all in an attempt to force these communities to move from the affluent West Austin to East Austin, which they named the Negro District. with the false promise that they would be safe, and have full amenities equal to those of the surrounding white neighborhoods. The next slide, generations, Cecilia Glasgow, Leanne Dukes, and Madison Fresh. I met this family on my first day out with photographer Hakeem Adewumi. The mother of Cecilia Glasgow is part of the last generation of Clarksville natives to grow up there. Neither she nor her daughter nor granddaughter live in Clarksville. They were visiting a family member after church. This beautiful image is a bittersweet one to me. It symbolizes all the amazing people I met and stories shared with me through this exhibition, and the long-lasting relationships that have been forged. However, it also speaks to the fact that Clarksville, that was founded as a hush harbor, a safe space, a respite, a dream, a promise, a new beginning in 1871 is disappearing. Today, out of 165 single and multi-family homes, only 10 of them are occupied by Black families. And of that 10, only 4 families own those homes. This is the remains of Woodlawn Plantation boundary wall. So Clarksville was land originally that was part of a plantation called Woodlawn, which was owned by former governor of Texas, Elijah Pease. And it's very interesting because this part of Clarksville's history is something that people don't like to talk about and don't acknowledge. So it was really important to me that this picture was part of this exhibition. There was also a running narrative that this man, Elijah Pease, was a benevolent and kind person who treated those he enslaved very well. One that continues to come up often, and I'll get this especially by the now all-white board that manages and oversees the Clarksville neighborhood. Today, the boundary wall sits in someone's front yard close to a commercial area full of businesses. It is passed frequently. One day I watched as people parked next to or near it in the neighborhood and hurried around the corner to yoga studios, high-priced restaurants, boutiques, hipster havens, and coffee shops. To my knowledge, few are aware of what the wall is or represents. So again, it was imperative for me to include this photo. However, after many tries, working with Celeste Henry, the photographer I just had, we couldn't get it. So out of frustration, I was like, let's call it a day. I went home and I just sat and I thought about it and prayed on it, meditated on it, and came back. I returned with candles from my ancestral altar and had a dear friend of mine say a special prayer in order to acknowledge and honor who was there, what happened at that site, and finally, this picture came from it. Come on. Oh, Lord, okay. So I just quickly wanted to show you this picture. I am a descendant of Clarksville. My grandparents met in Clarksville, my great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents were Clarksville. So this was an amazing experience for me. And this is my mother, and these are her hands, and it was just such an amazing experience. And for us, this was a part of my family I didn't know a lot about. So and in many ways, it was a reconciliation. And this final photo is one that we took together, again, of remnants of things that were found in Clarksville that kind of speak to this idea of, again, of loss, remembering, like someone's memories, broken symbols of home, once lost. Yet, at least for the moment, I always like to say they were safe in my hands, they were safe in my mother's hands. So if you want more information, please talk to me. There's a lot that I'm doing. This is the beginning of this project. There's a lot of pieces to it that are continuing. And I just want to say in closing that this experience and journey has been an invaluable and healing one. It has helped me to further locate and solidify my voice, to use my spiritual gifts, connection to the ancestors, commitment to art as activism and truth-telling, and how I approach the past and current narratives of people and communities throughout the Black diaspora. have been refreshed and renewed to continue to acknowledge and create work that centers around the power of place, home, and memory. Thank you.
I think we're supposed to open up for questions. No moderators, so we can answer if you have them for a particular presentation. Did other people want to come up?
Everybody.
Anybody come up and sit down?
You know what, we may not have time for the other people that are gonna be coming
Okay.
here, so just.
So maybe
yeah.
one question.
I was just curious, I have lots of questions, because this was amazing for all of you. Your book, you kept saying we, so I was wondering if it was a collaborative effort?
Yes, sorry. So I have a co-author. Her name is Leslie. Her name is Leslie Blair. She wasn't able to come with me. So she did a lot of the editing work. So we're both actually staff members of the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement. I started the project when I was in grad school, and so didn't have a ton of time to do that. So Leslie, in collaboration with UT Press, edited the book.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I say we because the precursors helped write their own stories as well.
Thank you, Dr. Cumberbatch. I actually heard your interview on TPR last week for the book, and I thought it was really excellent. Look forward to getting the book and teaching it in class. And what I thought was interesting about the radio interview was when you talked about the precursors and how some of them had some ambivalence about revisiting that time in their lives, and the struggles that Human Sweat himself had that he didn't actually finish, and then some of them having to go back and recount those stories. If you could share a little bit more about that and some of those ambivalences, I thought that was.
Sure. So I mean, I think for us, the mission of this book was to provide some personal insight. There's 2 other books that have been written, but nothing comprehensive, and those specifically around the Human Sweat case. And to realize that there was diversity in people's experience. Some people, never had their personal experience didn't endure, racial persecution in any way, but some it was extremely traumatizing, even if it wasn't visceral. It was a part of their academic experience, being the only Black person in a classroom, and knowing that this has been a huge story around the city, and the physical stress that it takes on your body. And for Human Sweat, he ended up having to drop out of law school because of health conditions that were after a 5-year fight, in the courts. And so we did have a lot of precursors who said no to being interviewed, who didn't want to write their story. And then we had others who talked about by being interviewed and by actually taking pen to paper, it was such a healing experience for them. And so I think for us, it was just providing that opportunity that seemed to make it worthwhile.
Good question.
I have one more question about the book. Can you say something about what you hope it will be, that book, the impact of that book will be on contemporary students, and how it will? And you mentioned you used the word reconciliation earlier, I believe. Can you talk about that a little bit, especially in light of your own role on campus?
So my role is particularly around sort of external relationships with the community, but within our division, it is exactly that. How are we changing policy to not only, we often talk about diversity, right, which is just the numbers, right? So we can have as many students of color as possible at UT, but if the inclusion and equitable part aren't there, where students are actually feeling like they're getting not just an amazing academic experience, but social experience, then we're not doing our job. And so for us, we felt like the book could be a generational bridge builder, right? Where these precursors have such incredible stories of resilience and have done so much to create the experience that students of color have now. And for me, even walking around campus, we have all these statues that are recognizing these other stories, some stories that were in opposition of my existence. It's bringing a new story to light, not just for students of color, but all students on campus and all staff members. So hopefully we're doing a little bit of that. Well, we hope that professors will just put it on their syllabus. We have 3 different events that we're doing throughout the year. So we're giving away some of the books. This is not a money-making, project. So giving away some of the books, but also for us, it was before the book was even published, or before we even had a promise that it would be published. We had 4 different symposiums where we invited the precursors to campus to have conversations with students. So for us, it was more around that personal interaction than just the book itself.